HOA Karen almost shot me because I changed my Wi-Fi password. A totally unexpected shot. I never thought changing my Wi-Fi password would nearly get me shot. But when you live in an HOA where Karen thinks she's the sheriff, even your internet security turns into a neighborhood crisis. One normal afternoon turned into a full-blown HOA standoff, with threats, accusations, and something I never expected: the glint of a loaded weapon. Here's how a simple tech update almost turned deadly in suburbia. It started out like any other Tuesday. Quiet, uneventful, and just the way I liked it. I was sipping coffee in my kitchen, scrolling through emails, when I noticed my Wi-Fi had been acting up again. Sluggish speeds, random disconnects, weird devices showing up in the admin panel. Things that didn't sit right with me. I had put off dealing with it for weeks, but that morning, I finally decided enough was enough. I logged into my router settings, changed the SSID, updated the password, and kicked off all connected devices. Felt like digital spring cleaning, harmless and overdue. But what I didn't know was that pressing save on that router page would trigger a series of events that almost got me shot by my own neighbor. Now, I had heard the HOA gossip. Everyone had. Karen. Yes, that's her actual name. Lived 2 houses down and had a reputation. She monitored trash bins, tracked lawn heights, and once submitted an 11-page complaint about a Halloween decoration that disrupted the visual integrity of the cul-de-sac. She wasn't just your average neighborhood busybody. She was the queen of compliance, self-appointed enforcer of rules written and unwritten. Still, I always kept my distance, gave polite nods when we crossed paths, and figured if I kept my yard clean and my mailbox unbent, I'd stay off her radar. I was wrong. Within 20 minutes of the Wi-Fi update, I got the first text. It was from a random number, no name saved in my phone. The message was short, aggressive, and oddly specific. You changed it. Why? I need access. This affects me too. I stared at it, confused. My first thought was that it was spam or some scam, but then came the second message. Don't be selfish. You know the HOA voted to keep neighborhood Wi-Fi stable. Don't make me come over. That's when the slow dread began to creep in. I realized the messages were coming from Karen. I hadn't shared my Wi-Fi password with her, or anyone in the neighborhood, but there had been a time last year when I'd let a visiting relative connect, and I remember them jokingly saying, "You're probably feeding half the block with this thing." I didn't think much of it then. I thought people respected boundaries. Apparently not. Before I could even type a response, there was a knock at the door. Sharp, deliberate, impatient. I opened it, and there she was, standing on my porch, arms crossed, face tight with irritation. "You changed the Wi-Fi," she said, like she was accusing me of arson. "My cameras went down. I can't monitor anything. You've compromised neighborhood security." I blinked. I changed my Wi-Fi password. Karen stepped forward, not waiting to be invited in. "You don't get to make those decisions unilaterally," she hissed. "The HOA depends on stable internet connections. Everyone knows you have the strongest signal. Half the neighborhood piggybacks off you. That's why we've had peace. And now, chaos. Thanks to you." She wasn't even hiding it. She had been stealing my Wi-Fi, and so had others. This wasn't just nosiness, it was full-blown entitlement. I told her I had noticed strange devices on my network and had every right to protect it. Her expression twisted into something darker. "That's not your decision," she snapped. "You've disrupted the system. There will be consequences." It didn't feel like a conversation anymore. Felt like a threat. I tried to stay calm, told her this wasn't something the HOA had jurisdiction over, and asked her to leave my porch. That's when she muttered something under her breath I couldn't quite catch, turned sharply, and stormed back toward her house. I figured that would be the end of it. Just another Karen tantrum. But I was wrong again. What I didn't realize was how deep her sense of control went. She had normalized the idea that what was mine was hers. That my internet, my property, even my privacy were subject to her say-so. That by changing a password, I hadn't just locked her out of Wi-Fi, I had challenged her authority. And in her world, that required retaliation. I watched her pace on her lawn, speaking furiously into her phone. She kept glancing back at my house. Then she disappeared inside. For a few minutes, I stood there, thinking maybe I should call someone, report it to the HOA board, maybe even the police. But what would I say? My neighbor's mad I changed my Wi-Fi password? It sounded ridiculous. Until it wasn't. Because what happened next wasn't just petty. It was dangerous. The moment I updated the password and reset my router, a strange silence fell over the house. Not the quiet kind, but the type you feel in your gut. It's that feeling when something is off, when you know you've done something innocent but suspect the world around you won't take it that way. I brushed it off at first, assuming no one would notice a password change. I mean, who would even care? It was my internet. But less than half an hour later, the bizarre reactions began to trickle in, confirming that I just pulled the digital plug on a hidden, unspoken arrangement that had been quietly operating under my nose. The first notification came from my smart doorbell camera. Someone was standing on the sidewalk outside my house, just standing there, phone in hand, occasionally glancing up toward the front windows. I zoomed in on the feed and realized it was one of Karen's friends, Donna, a woman I barely knew except for her reputation as Karen's echo chamber. She wasn't walking a dog or checking her mail. She was clearly there for a reason, and when she finally turned to walk away, she looked directly at the camera and shook her head in disapproval. That was my first sign that whatever I had unknowingly disrupted was bigger than I thought. Soon after, the group text started. I had somehow been added to a neighborhood thread on WhatsApp that I never remembered joining. The messages came in fast, passive-aggressive at first, then clearly accusatory. Anyone else notice the Wi-Fi signal is gone? We had a system that worked. Why did someone mess it up? Disrupting security is reckless and selfish. And then, finally, from Karen herself, we all agreed last year to use one network for simplicity. I thought we had an understanding. Now we're exposed. That last line made my jaw tighten. Exposed? Exposed to what? My Wi-Fi was not some neighborhood infrastructure. This wasn't a utility I had signed up to share. It was a private service I paid for every month. But clearly, this group had developed an internal narrative where my internet was part of the community package, unofficially sanctioned by Karen, and sustained by silent access. And now, because I had changed one password, I had become the villain in a suburban tech conspiracy. I started scrolling through the chat history and found older messages going back months. People casually mentioning outages and Karen replying with things like, "Don't worry, I'll ask him to reboot," or, "He's usually good about fixing it quickly." She had been speaking on my behalf, pretending to manage a network she didn't own. I was stunned. It was like discovering that your neighbor had been giving tours of your house while you were out, acting like they had the authority. My property had been turned into a shared commodity without my knowledge or permission. The most unsettling part was realizing just how many people were in on it. At least 9 neighbors had been accessing my network. Some had even installed smart home devices, cameras, thermostats, lights, all dependent on my connection. It explained the bandwidth drain I'd been dealing with. It explained the random spikes in data usage. It explained the reason Karen's tone had turned so hostile so fast. I hadn't just removed her access. I had knocked out an entire web of surveillance and convenience she'd helped construct, using my resources. I didn't reply to the group chat. What could I say that wouldn't turn the situation even more hostile? But the silence on my end only seemed to escalate things. The messages became more frequent, and the language more pointed. "You're putting the whole block at risk. This is why we need real rules about tech access. Selfish behavior like this endangers everyone." It was like I had crossed an invisible line. One I never agreed to, never even saw coming. That night, I began receiving strange pings on my phone. Failed connection attempts. Devices trying to log into the new network. Someone or several people were repeatedly trying to guess the new password. I watched in real time as the digital siege began. My home was no longer just a house. It was now the fortress that used to be their backdoor. And they wanted back in badly. Even stranger, my Ring camera picked up more than just visitors. I noticed movement near the cable box outside. Shadows lurking a little too long near the corner of the garage. It was as if the neighborhood had decided that taking matters into their own hands was justified. And leading this digital rebellion, of course, was Karen, who clearly saw this as more than a technical issue. To her, it was personal. I hadn't just changed a password. I had challenged her authority and disrupted a system she thought she controlled. The doorbell rang again the next morning, sharp and urgent. I didn't need to check the camera. I already knew who it was. I paused, took a breath, and opened the door. Sure enough, there she stood. Karen, hands on hips, lips tight, eyes flaring with that mix of fake concern and barely contained rage. But this time, she didn't wait for me to greet her or ask what she needed. She pushed her way forward until her shadow crossed the threshold, like she had a right to be there. "Good morning," she said, her voice coated in a kind of brittle politeness that was more accusation than greeting. "We need to talk." I stayed calm and didn't move. "About what?" She took a breath, clearly rehearsed. "Look, I understand you're feeling territorial or whatever, but what you did yesterday, it's not how we handle things in this community. You changed the Wi-Fi password without informing anyone. That's not okay." The audacity in her voice made my stomach twist. It was like she truly believed she had a legitimate say in what I did with my private internet. But I also knew that confronting her with logic or tech jargon wasn't going to work. People like Karen didn't operate on truth, they operated on control. Still, I kept my tone steady. "I don't think I need to inform anyone when I secure my own network," I said. "It's my account. I pay the bill. It's not public property." Karen rolled her eyes like I was the irrational one. "You don't understand. A lot of people rely on that signal. We've built systems around it. Cameras, monitors, emergency alerts. You can't just pull the plug and expect everyone to adjust overnight. You put this neighborhood at risk." I could feel the shift in her voice. She wasn't just complaining, she was escalating. Her tone was rehearsed, like she was laying the groundwork for a formal complaint. Her words were veiled threats, dressed up in community concern. But underneath it all, I could hear it clearly. She was losing her grip on something she had no business controlling in the first place. I didn't answer right away. She took my silence as an opportunity to keep talking. "You know this neighborhood. Not everyone can afford top-tier internet plans. When you first moved in, you were nice about it. Friendly, cooperative. What changed? Why are you acting like this is some hostile takeover?" I almost laughed at the irony. I'm the one acting hostile? I tightened security on my own internet, and suddenly I'm a cyber tyrant? The idea that she saw generosity as a permanent obligation, that being friendly meant being endlessly exploitable, was honestly mind-blowing. "I changed my password because I was noticing unusual activity on my network," I said slowly. "Unknown devices. High bandwidth usage. That's a security risk for me. I didn't even know anyone else was using it." Karen scoffed. "Oh, come on. You had to have known. Everyone's been using it for months. It's not a big deal. You have unlimited data, right? What's the harm?" The harm, I thought, was standing right in front of me. This woman who felt so entitled to my resources that she thought showing up at my door, uninvited, with demands, was a reasonable response to a password update. The harm was the erosion of boundaries, the assumption that being neighbors gave her authority over my property, my privacy, my tech. And then she said something that truly rattled me. "I'm just trying to avoid this becoming a bigger issue," she said quietly. "You've already upset a lot of people. Donna, the bakers, even Mr. Patel across the street. They're all talking about how unpredictable you've become. I mean, no one wants this to get formal." There it was. The warning. The implied threat of HOA intervention. She was framing me as the disruptive one, the one causing unrest. And she was doing it with full confidence that the people she mentioned would back her up. After all, they had been riding my Wi-Fi for months. I had unknowingly been providing them with free service, and now that it was gone, they were circling the wagons. Karen leaned in a little as if offering some false olive branch. "Look, if you just give me the new password, I can distribute it. Quietly. No drama. We can pretend this never happened." I stared at her for a long second, trying to process the sheer absurdity of what I was hearing. She wasn't even trying to hide her manipulation anymore. She expected me to surrender out of convenience, to trade my peace of mind for her control. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just stood there, and eventually, she stepped back, clearly annoyed that I wasn't bending. She gave one last condescending nod and turned to walk away, muttering under her breath. That encounter made it clear. This wasn't over. In her mind, this was now a power struggle, and Karen never liked losing ground. Later that day, after Karen's little doorstep monologue, I started noticing odd behavior from a few of the other neighbors. The kind of behavior that didn't look aggressive on the surface, but definitely didn't feel casual either. I'd step outside to check the mail, and suddenly conversations would stop. People I used to wave at wouldn't look me in the eye. Donna, who usually watered her garden right before sunset, suddenly seemed to be standing outside all day, glancing toward my house every few minutes, like she was expecting something to happen. I even caught Mr. Patel sitting in his parked car facing my driveway for nearly 45 minutes, just scrolling on his phone and sipping coffee. None of this was normal. It was clear now Karen had launched her campaign. She'd framed me as the bad guy, the outsider, the tech tyrant who pulled the plug on the community's digital lifeline. It was surreal. I had lived here peacefully for years, and in less than 24 hours, I'd become the pariah over something as simple as a password. And the most twisted part? Karen had built her argument on a foundation of fake rules and misinformation. That evening, I got a knock on my door again. This time, not from Karen, but from an older man named Jerry, a member of the HOA board. I'd spoken with him a few times during community meetings. He was usually calm and rational, not the type to get involved in drama. So when I saw him standing there, holding a clipboard and looking uncomfortable, I knew something was up. "Hey," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Mind if I come in for a quick word?" I let him in. We stood in the entryway while he glanced down at his clipboard and then looked up, clearly unsure how to begin. "So, we've had a couple of concerns raised about connectivity, safety, stability of the neighborhood's communication systems. Just wanted to get your side." I was stunned for a moment, then asked, "Are you telling me there's an actual HOA rule about Wi-Fi sharing?" Jerry hesitated. "Well, not exactly. No, there's no official rule. But apparently there's been a sort of informal arrangement in place. Karen says you were aware of it, that you agreed to keep your router open for community emergency alerts. She claims you were the designated node." I blinked. "Designated node? That's not even a thing." Jerry gave a weak laugh. "Yeah, I figured, but she's filed a written complaint now. Says your network used to provide critical access to certain homes, especially those with elderly residents who rely on smart alert systems." I could feel the heat rising in my neck. Karen was manufacturing a full-blown crisis, turning her freeloading scheme into some community necessity. She had found a way to disguise her entitlement as public safety. "Jerry, I never agreed to anything," I said calmly. "No one asked me for permission. No one explained any system. I've been paying for my internet, upgrading my equipment, dealing with slow speeds for months. All because half the block was secretly using it without my knowledge." He nodded. "Look, I get it. I really do. I'm just the guy the board sends when complaints hit a certain number." Karen's got about 8 people backing her version of the story. Of course she did. Anyone who had been using the free signal had every reason to protect it. And now that it was gone, they were rallying behind Karen, hoping she could bully me into reactivating it. The absurdity of it all was almost laughable. A group of suburban adults had invented a fake rulebook, decided I'd violated it, and were now pretending I was the community's cybercriminal. I told Jerry I had no intention of changing my password back, and if anyone had security concerns, they were free to get their own service. He nodded again, thanked me, and left without much argument. But the damage was done. The rumor mill had been activated, and Karen had successfully made the issue feel official, even though it was built entirely on lies. That night, I found a printed notice taped to my door. Not from the HOA. There was no letterhead or official language, but from concerned residents of the community. It read like a warning. In times of uncertainty, we must rely on each other. Disruption of shared systems weakens us all. Please reconsider your actions before more drastic measures are necessary. No signature, just that vague, veiled threat. My internet password wasn't the problem. It was the symbol, the line I drew, and Karen wasn't going to let it go easily. It was a little after 9 p.m. when I stepped out onto my front porch, needing some air and space from the tension that had wrapped itself around my house like a fog. The porch light buzzed softly above me, casting a dull glow over the driveway. Everything seemed quiet, too quiet, like the whole neighborhood had gone into hiding just to watch what would happen next. I leaned against the railing, trying to clear my head, when I saw a figure standing across the street. At first, I thought maybe it was just someone walking their dog or heading home from an evening stroll, but there was no leash, no movement, just a person standing still, almost as if studying my house. The figure stepped under the street lamp, and that's when I recognized the silhouette, Karen. Arms crossed, jaw clenched, phone in hand, glaring like she was waiting for something. I didn't say a word. I just went back inside and locked the door. But the uneasy feeling didn't go away. About 30 minutes later, I was sitting in the living room when my phone vibrated. It was a notification from my Ring doorbell. I opened the app and saw Karen approaching my front steps. This time she wasn't alone. She had Donna with her, and they were both talking, clearly agitated. Karen pointed at my doorbell cam, said something, then motioned toward the side of my house. I didn't even have time to process what she might be planning before I heard the unmistakable sound of something tapping my window. Not hard, just enough to make its presence known. I stood frozen for a moment. The sound came again, 3 soft taps, deliberate. I moved toward the front door, not opening it yet, just trying to see what was going on. Then the knocking began. It wasn't the polite kind. It was the kind that demanded attention. I finally opened the door, keeping the chain latch in place, and looked through the gap. Karen stood there alone now, her phone still in her hand, her eyes unblinking. "You ignored the messages," she said, her voice low and cold. "So now I'm here. I don't owe you access to anything," I said calmly. "This is harassment." Karen took a step back, her expression hardening. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. You think this is about Wi-Fi. It's not. It's about respect. Community. You've isolated yourself, and that's dangerous for everyone." She paused, then added, "You've left us no choice." She turned and walked back down the steps, disappearing into the darkness. I shut the door, locked it, and immediately started reviewing my security footage from the past few hours. What I saw next made my stomach lurch. At some point earlier in the evening, a person had walked around the side of my house and crouched near the cable box mounted along the outer wall. The video wasn't clear enough to identify the face, but the timing lined up too perfectly with when Karen had been standing across the street. Someone had tried to tamper with my connection. Whether to disable it or reconnect to it, I didn't know. But the intent was there, and it was escalating. Around 11 p.m., I was in the kitchen when I heard a sudden, sharp knock on the back door. Not the front, this time it was the rear entrance, the one that opened to the fenced-in yard. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. I flipped on the floodlights. Nothing. I opened the door just a crack, and then it happened. A loud pop. I froze. The sound echoed off the surrounding houses, sharp and metallic. For a split second, I thought it might have been fireworks or a car backfiring, but the timing was too perfect, too coincidental. I ducked back inside and shut the door, heart pounding. I didn't know what that sound had been, but every instinct in my body told me it wasn't random. I went back to the Ring app and scrolled through the last 5 minutes of footage. That's when I saw it. Karen had returned, alone again, walking along the side of my house, her hand inside her oversized jacket. She paused at the edge of the porch, looked up at the window, and then there was a flicker of light, like a glint of metal. Something shiny, something small. The footage didn't capture a clear view of what was in her hand, but it didn't need to. My instincts filled in the blanks. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off and my phone in my hand, ready to call the police if I saw or heard anything else. The The sense of danger wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was real. Karen had crossed a line, and she wasn't hiding it. After that night, everything changed. The tension that had been quietly building exploded into something undeniable. Something you could feel every time you walked past a window or heard a car door slam outside. I wasn't just paranoid anymore. I was being watched, monitored, targeted, and I had proof. I saved all the footage from my security system, especially the clip showing Karen near my side yard with something shiny in her hand. It wasn't enough to make a clear case, but it was enough to convince me that I couldn't just brush this off anymore. The next morning, I called the police. I didn't dramatize anything. I just laid out the facts. Someone may have tried to tamper with my property. I heard a loud popping noise that could have been a weapon discharge, and there was a pattern of harassment coming from a specific neighbor. The officer who showed up was professional but cautious. He watched the video, took notes, and asked questions. Then he looked me in the eye and said, "If you feel threatened, document everything. But be aware, without a clear weapon or damage, it's your word against hers." That was the frustrating part. Karen was smart. She played on the edge of legality, never crossing into clear criminal behavior but always dancing close enough to make you feel unsafe. She wasn't just angry about the Wi-Fi. She was angry about losing control, about being told no. And now that I had refused to back down, she was escalating her tactics. I started to notice more signs. My trash cans were tipped over 2 days in a row. My mailbox was left open every morning, even though I was sure I had closed it. One night, I found footprints in the flower bed by my window, fresh and not mine. There was no real damage, nothing big enough to report, but everything screamed intimidation. And every day I felt like I was being tested, like Karen was waiting to see how far she could push before I'd break or retaliate. I didn't retaliate. I upgraded. I installed 2 more outdoor cameras, set motion sensors to trigger automated lights, and programmed my system to alert me directly if any device tried to connect to my network again. I also kept a digital log of every incident, every message, every suspicious noise. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about building a record. I knew Karen wanted me to react, to do something that would make me look like the aggressor. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Then one afternoon, something happened that changed everything. I was in the backyard when I heard a car pull up in front of the house. I walked around to see a squad car parked at the curb. My stomach dropped for a second until I saw who stepped out. It was the same officer from earlier, but this time he wasn't alone. With him was another officer and someone from the HOA board, Jerry. I walked out to meet them, already preparing for some kind of update or follow-up. But what I got instead was unexpected. The officer said they had received a 911 call from someone in the neighborhood, Karen, reporting that I had threatened her life during a confrontation, that I had said she would regret messing with my property, that I had displayed a weapon. I was stunned. None of that had happened. I hadn't even spoken to Karen since the last time she stood at my door. They asked to see any footage I had. I invited them inside, pulled up the recordings, and showed them everything, from the nighttime prowling to the incident with the loud pop. As the video played, I saw Jerry's expression change. He knew. Whether he liked Karen or not, he could see what was happening now. The officers watched quietly, took statements, and then stepped outside to speak privately. After a while, the officers returned and told me Karen had made multiple reports over the past few weeks, each one getting more dramatic. But this was the first time she had accused me of being armed. That was serious. They said they needed to investigate further, but based on what they'd seen, it looked like a false report. Jerry stayed behind after the officers left. He didn't say much, just nodded toward the screen and said, "She's not going to like that. This didn't go her way." He was right. Karen had played her biggest card, and it didn't work. She thought calling the cops on me would force my hand, humiliate me, maybe even get me arrested. But instead, it backfired. Her accusations were now on record, her behavior caught on camera, and her credibility with the HOA beginning to unravel. It wasn't over, but the power dynamic had shifted. She wasn't in control anymore. I wasn't just reacting, I was prepared. And now, so were the people who used to back her blindly. 13.